I never thought a New Year's Eve party would be the night that changed everything between Marcus and me. But here we are, 3 weeks later, and I still can't stop thinking about those 10 seconds at midnight when his lips touched mine and the entire world just stopped existing. Let me back up though, because this story doesn't start on New Year's Eve. It starts about 8 months earlier, on a completely ordinary Tuesday afternoon in May, when Marcus moved into the apartment next door. I was carrying groceries up the stairs, struggling with too many bags because I always convince myself I can make it in one trip, when this guy appears on the landing with the kind of smile that makes you forget what you were doing. He grabbed 2 of my bags without asking, said something about how he was moving in next door, and figured he should start being a good neighbor immediately, and that was it. That was how Marcus entered my life, just this effortless presence that felt like it had always been there. We became friends fast, like suspiciously fast. The kind of fast that made my other friends raise their eyebrows and ask questions I didn't want to answer. Within a week, we were having coffee together every morning before work. Within 2 weeks, we had keys to each other's apartments for emergencies. Within a month, I was pretty sure I was completely screwed because I'd developed feelings for my straight neighbor who talked about his ex-girlfriend approximately every 3 days and who definitely, absolutely, without question, did not see me as anything other than his buddy. Marcus worked in graphic design for some tech startup downtown, one of those companies with beanbag chairs and kombucha on tap, and a CEO who wore hoodies to board meetings. He'd show me his projects sometimes, these beautiful minimalist designs that somehow conveyed entire emotional narratives with just a few lines and colors. I worked in accounting, which is about as far from creative as you can get, but Marcus never made me feel boring. He'd ask about my day with genuine interest, like he actually cared about the spreadsheet drama and the passive-aggressive emails from Janet in receivables. We fell into this routine that felt domestic in a way that probably should have warned me I was getting in too deep. Tuesday nights were pizza and bad movies at my place. Thursday nights were cooking experiments at his place, which usually ended with us ordering takeout because neither of us could really cook. Weekends were whatever we felt like, sometimes hiking in the state park an hour away, sometimes just lying on his couch playing video games and arguing about whether The Last of Us sequel ruined the franchise. I knew he was straight. He'd told me about his ex-girlfriend Stephanie within the first week of knowing him. This whole complicated story about how they'd been together for 3 years, and she'd wanted to move to Portland for a job opportunity, and he'd wanted to stay here because his whole life was here, and eventually they'd realized they wanted different things. He talked about her with this wistful fondness that made it clear he wasn't over her, not really. And he mentioned women he found attractive sometimes, pointed out girls at coffee shops or commented on actresses in movies, all the normal straight guy stuff that reminded me to keep my feelings locked down tight. But here's the thing about spending that much time with someone. You start noticing things, little things. The way Marcus would touch my shoulder when he laughed at something I said, the way he'd text me goodnight even when we'd just spent the entire evening together. The way he looked at me sometimes when he thought I wasn't paying attention, with this expression I couldn't quite read. I told myself I was imagining it, projecting my own feelings onto innocent, friendly gestures. I'd been down that road before with straight guys, and it never ended well. My friend Desmond told me I was being an idiot. We were at this bar in October, one of those places with exposed brick and overpriced cocktails, and I was explaining the whole Marcus situation for probably the 100th time. Desmond just looked at me with his eyebrows raised and said, "No straight guy is that invested in a friendship," and I told him he was wrong, that some guys were just genuinely good friends, that not everything had to be about attraction. Desmond took a sip of his old-fashioned and said, "Okay, but when it all blows up in your face, remember I called it." November was when things started feeling different. Marcus broke up with the girl he'd been casually seeing for a few weeks, someone he'd met through work named Ashley. He didn't seem particularly torn up about it, just mentioned it in passing one morning over coffee like it was no big deal. But after that, he started spending even more time at my place. We'd watch TV until 2 in the morning on work nights, both of us too tired to move, but neither wanting to be the first to say goodnight. He started doing this thing where he'd fall asleep on my couch and I'd have to wake him up to send him home, and he'd give me this sleepy smile and say he was too comfortable to move. One night in early December, we were watching some documentary about ocean life, and Marcus just kind of shifted on the couch and ended up with his head on my shoulder. My heart was pounding so hard, I was sure he could hear it, but I didn't move. I barely breathed. We stayed like that for the rest of the documentary, and when it ended, Marcus sat up and stretched and said he should probably head home, and neither of us acknowledged what had just happened. But something had shifted. I could feel it. Christmas came and went. I went to visit my parents for a few days, and Marcus went to his sister's place upstate. We texted constantly while we were apart. Stupid stuff mostly. Memes and complaints about family obligations and countdowns until we'd be back. When I got home on the 27th, Marcus was waiting outside my door with Chinese takeout and a six-pack of beer, and the smile on his face when he saw me made my chest ache. That's when he brought up New Year's Eve. His coworker Jenna was throwing a party at her place, one of those big blowout things with too many people and too much alcohol and a countdown to midnight on the TV. Marcus asked if I wanted to go with him, said it would be more fun if I was there, and of course, I said yes. I would have said yes to anything he asked. The party was exactly what I expected. Jenna's apartment was packed with people I didn't know, all of them loud and already drunk, even though it was only 9 o'clock. Marcus knew most of them from work, and he introduced me around, his hand on my back, as he steered me through the crowd. We found a spot near the kitchen where we could talk without shouting, and we fell into our usual rhythm, making jokes about the terrible music and the guy in the corner who was definitely about to throw up. Around 11, Marcus suggested we go out on the balcony for some air. It was freezing, one of those clear winter nights where you can see your breath and the cold bites at your face. But it was quieter out there, just us and the city lights spread out below. Marcus leaned against the railing and looked out at the skyline, and I stood next to him, close enough that our shoulders were almost touching. We talked about the year that was ending, all the things that had happened. Marcus said moving to this building was the best decision he'd made, that he didn't know what he would have done without me these past months. I told him the same, that he'd made everything better, that I couldn't imagine my life without him in it now. And there was this moment where we just looked at each other, and I swear something passed between us, some acknowledgement of all the things we weren't saying. Someone opened the balcony door and yelled that it was almost midnight, that we needed to come inside for the countdown. We went back in, squeezed into the living room with everyone else, all of us staring at the TV, as the ball dropped in Times Square. The countdown started. 10, 9, 8. Marcus was standing right next to me, so close I could feel the warmth of him. 7, 6, 5. My heart was racing. 4, 3, 2. I turned to say Happy New Year to him, just a normal friendly thing. 1. And then Marcus kissed me. It wasn't a peck on the cheek or a friendly New Year's thing. It was a real kiss, his hand on the back of my neck, his lips on mine, soft and warm and absolutely intentional. The room erupted in noise around us, everyone cheering and hugging and celebrating, but I couldn't hear any of it. There was just Marcus, kissing me at midnight on New Year's Eve like it was the most natural thing in the world. It lasted maybe 10 seconds. Then he pulled back, smiled at me like nothing earth-shattering had just happened, and said, Happy New Year. I couldn't speak. I just stood there staring at him while he turned to hug Jenna and wish her a Happy New Year, like he hadn't just completely upended my entire understanding of our friendship. We stayed at the party for another hour. I was in a daze the whole time, going through the motions of conversation while my mind replayed those 10 seconds over and over. Marcus acted completely normal, laughing and drinking and chatting with his coworkers. He didn't mention the kiss. He didn't even look at me differently. It was like it hadn't happened at all. When we finally left, walking back to our building through the cold early morning streets, I thought maybe this was it. Maybe we'd talk about it now. But Marcus just talked about the party, about how Jenna's boyfriend had gotten way too drunk and how someone had broken a lamp. We got to our doors, and he said goodnight, and he went into his apartment, and I went into mine, and I stood in my dark living room, wondering if I'd imagined the whole thing. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, replaying every moment, every detail, the way his hand had felt on my neck, the way he'd tasted like champagne, the way he'd looked at me right before he did it, like he was making a decision, but also the way he'd acted after, like nothing had changed, like it didn't matter. I didn't see Marcus the next day. New Year's Day, and we didn't have our usual morning coffee. I told myself he was probably hungover, sleeping it off. But the day after that, when I ran into him in the hallway, he was friendly and normal and made no mention of the kiss. He asked if I wanted to come over for dinner that night, said he was going to attempt to make pasta from scratch. I said yes, because I couldn't not say yes. because I needed to understand what was happening. Dinner was fine, normal. We made the pasta, which turned out surprisingly edible, and we watched an episode of the show we'd been binge-watching. Marcus sat on his end of the couch, I sat on mine, and there was this careful distance between us that hadn't been there before. When I finally worked up the courage to bring it up, to mention New Year's Eve, Marcus just laughed it off. He said it was a New Year's thing, that it didn't count, that everyone kisses people at midnight. He said it so casually, like he genuinely believed it. And I didn't know how to explain that. No, actually, that's not how it works. That's not what that was. I let it go. What else could I do? But things were different after that. We still saw each other, still did our Tuesday pizza nights and Thursday cooking attempts, but there was this tension now, this awareness. I caught Marcus looking at me sometimes with that same unreadable expression, but whenever our eyes met, he'd look away. We were more careful about physical contact, like we were both afraid of what might happen if we touched. 2 weeks went by like this. 2 weeks of me trying to act normal while feeling like I was losing my mind. 2 weeks of wondering if I should just tell him how I felt, or if that would ruin everything, or if everything was already ruined. I talked to Desmond again, and he told me I needed to be honest, that I couldn't keep living in this limbo. I knew he was right, but I was terrified. Last Thursday, 3 weeks after the kiss, Marcus showed up at my door at 10 at night. I was already in my pajamas, watching some cooking show and eating ice cream straight from the container. He looked stressed, his hair messy like he'd been running his hands through it, his eyes intense in a way I'd never seen before. He said we needed to talk. My stomach dropped. This was it. This was the conversation where he told me he'd made a mistake, that he valued our friendship too much to let one drunken moment ruin it, that he hoped we could just forget it happened and move on. But that's not what he said. Instead, Marcus came in and sat on my couch and told me he hadn't been able to stop thinking about the kiss. He said he'd tried to convince himself it didn't mean anything, that it was just a New Year's thing, but he couldn't. He said he'd been lying to himself for months, maybe since the day we met, telling himself he was straight and that what he felt for me was just friendship. He said he'd never felt this way about a guy before, that it scared him, that he didn't know what he was doing. I didn't know what to say. I just sat there holding my ice cream, trying to process what I was hearing. Marcus kept talking. He said he understood if I didn't feel the same way, that he'd probably ruined everything by being a coward and pretending the kiss didn't matter. He said he missed me, missed the way things used to be between us, but he couldn't go back to pretending he didn't want more. His voice cracked a little when he said that last part, and I realized he was as scared as I was. I finally found my voice. I told him I'd had feelings for him since the beginning, that the kiss had been everything I'd wanted and everything I'd been afraid to want. I told him I'd spent 3 weeks thinking I'd imagined the whole thing, that I'd convinced myself it meant nothing to him. I told him I was terrified of losing him, but more terrified of not taking this chance. Marcus looked at me for a long moment, and then he smiled, this genuine, relieved smile that lit up his whole face. He said we were both idiots for waiting this long. Then he asked if he could kiss me again, for real this time, not as a New Year's thing, but as an us thing. I said yes. This kiss was different from the first one, slower, more intentional. We were both nervous, both figuring it out as we went, but it felt right in a way that nothing else ever had. When we finally pulled apart, Marcus laughed and said he couldn't believe it took him 3 weeks to do that again. We talked for hours that night, about everything, about how we'd both been feeling, about what this meant, about where we went from here. Marcus admitted he didn't have all the answers, that he was still figuring out his sexuality and what it meant that he'd fallen for a guy. I told him we could figure it out together, that there was no rush, that we could take things as slow as he needed. It's been 3 days since that conversation. 3 days of us being something more than friends, but still figuring out exactly what that something is. We haven't told anyone yet. We're taking it slow, spending time together, learning how to be this new version of us. Marcus still gets nervous sometimes, still second guesses himself, but he's trying. We both are. This morning, we had coffee together like we always do, but this time, Marcus reached across the table and held my hand while we talked about our plans for the day. It was such a small thing, but it felt monumental. Later, when we were leaving for work, he kissed me goodbye in the hallway between our apartments, quick and sweet, and then he smiled and said he'd see me tonight for pizza. I don't know what happens next. I don't know if this will work out or if we're both crazy for trying, but I know that kiss at midnight meant something, even if it took Marcus 3 weeks to admit it. I know that sometimes the scariest thing and the right thing are the same thing, and I know that whatever happens, I'm glad we're brave enough to try. So yeah, that's the story of how my straight best friend kissed me at midnight and tried to pretend it didn't count. Spoiler alert, it counted. It counted more than either of us were ready to admit. And now we're here, figuring out what comes after the kiss, after the confession, after all the fear and uncertainty. We're here, together, and that's enough for now, or